Good afternoon, everyone. Jamie Stone to move the motion.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to serve under the chairmanship. Thanks, Siobhan. I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 730605 relating to the mandatory collection on and publication of child sexual offender...
Will my honourable friend give way?
Goodness me.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Brave young constituents in Yeovil reported historic cases of sexual abuse, but workforce shortages in police, terrible communication and other failings meant years of stress, delays, and the CPS ruling it could not advance prosecution. Despite the evidence threshold being met, does my honourable friend agree we need urgent investment to ensure the criminal justice system can address historic cases of sexual violence and communicate clearly with victims, because no young person should see justice denied?
Jamie Stone.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. He makes his case with some passion, and I take note of it. Thank you. I thank him. As chair of the Petitions Committee, it's always encouraging to see public participation in politics, and I welcome our friends to the public gallery. With over 200,000 signatures, it's quite evident that this petition has engaged a very large number of people all across the country. Now, what I would just say at this point is just to remind people that the person leading a debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee sets the scene, as it were, and I will refer to the petitioner, I will refer to other points of the argument. The petition was created by our fellow member of the House of Commons, the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth. Prior to today, the member explained to me that he tabled this petition out of concern that existing non-statutory approaches to data collection and transparency regarding child sexual exploitation have been insufficient. He wants to see a clear legal duty imposed on the relevant authorities to consistently record and publish offender data regarding the nationality, the ethnicity, immigration status and religion of child sexual offenders. Furthermore, the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth explained to me that he found the government's response to the petition insufficient on the basis that it relies on expectations and directives rather than statutory duties. He believes this data should not only be collected, it should be published and standardised to achieve full transparency and accountability. Now, before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that there is a profound sensitivity to this subject. Alas, child sexual abuse is far more common than many people may think. Far more children are sexually abused than are ever identified or responded to. We believe that at least 500,000, 500,000 children in England and Wales are estimated to experience child sexual abuse every year. So crucially, I want to instil something into every member intending to participate in this debate. Behind every stat, every statistic, every case file and every policy discussion, there are real people whose lives have been deeply impacted by these offences. Those watching this debate, I will give way, certainly.
There are no more real people than the three girls that were mentioned in the BBC drama documentary in 2017 and the whistleblowers that were involved. Does he accept that within days of that broadcast, which was broadcast to the nation, which exposed the horrific actions of a Rochdale grooming gang, that within days of that, Andy Burnham commissioned an independent inquiry, which subsequently led to not just exposure of institutional failings, but also led to the vindication of those whistleblowers, and subsequently the arrest and the conviction of 7 sick paedophiles in Rochdale who were jailed for a total of more than 170 years. Doesn't that prove that we need to have real strong political leadership on this issue, but also cross-party consensus, and we shouldn't be making political points, party political points out of this. We should be working together to defeat paedophilia.
Can I point out to members, this is an incredibly important debate, which is why so many of you are here today, and I would ask you to be brief in your interventions out of respect for all other members who have something to say. Jamie Stone.
Thank you, James Siobhan. I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I think it underlines the point which I'm making, I hope, in my contribution. There will be many people watching this debate, and many of them, alas, will be survivors of child sexual abuse. who have not come to report their abuses until adulthood. That is the terrible thing. Their safety, dignity and well-being must surely remain at the centre of our debate of all that we say today. I also want to recognise that there will be people watching this debate who have felt failed by institutions and public authorities in the past. This is precisely why we should use any parliamentary time on this topic, specifically with regards to information sharing, as a way of better equipping safeguarding agencies, local authorities, our criminal justice system and Parliament to improve the protection of children. Unfortunately, no institution can undo past failures. However, we do have a responsibility to learn from them and to strengthen the systems we rely upon to improve the identification of abuse, our response to it, and the experience of survivors. I will give way with pleasure.
Honourable friend for giving way. And as we know, repeated research in the UK has shown that about half of child sexual abuse happens within the family and the majority of the rest of it from another known trusted adult. When I was the Chief Executive of a rape crisis service, I worked very closely with an organisation called Child Abuse Prevention UK, which taught children to recognise the signs of abuse and how to report it to a trusted adult such as a teacher. Unfortunately, they folded because of lack of funding, because the support for prevention and education in this area is absolutely non-existent.
Please, would the member sit down? Please do not make me have to intervene a third time. Jamie Stone.
Siobhan, I thank the member for her intervention. It is a point I shall come to very shortly. This particular petition provokes legitimate questions the public want answered with regards to how data regarding these offences is collected and how patterns of offending are identified. When discussing this practice, it is very important that we balance transparency with privacy, proportionality, and the risk that data may be misused or presented in a misleading way. For that reason, our discussion today must approach this petition with reasoned and constructive evidence-based recommendations. All of us should be guided by what best protects children, supports survivors, and strengthens public trust in safeguarding institutions when dealing with offenders. I give way to the honourable member.
I thank the honourable member for making a very clear and reasoned argument. Will you not also agree that everybody who's attended in this room does care deeply about what is a horrific crime out there, and that really we should not be attacking people because of their party political positions on this, but actually thinking about how we can come to this together?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. We have with us today people who have been through this dreadful experience, and it does scar a lifetime. I must say, I'm afraid, sadly, forever. By referring to the term offenders, this petition is focused on a person who has admitted guilt to a child sexual abuse offence, or, alternatively, has been found guilty in a court of law. Now, prior to this debate, I spoke with the Centre of Expertise on Child Sexual Abuse, who pointed out that, while there is understandable interest in strengthening the collection and scrutiny of data relating to offenders, such an approach taken in isolation will have but limited impact on the scale of harm they're seeking to confront in order to protect children. Data on known offenders is, by its very nature, retrospective. It's looking back. It tells us where the system has already failed. It does not help us identify where abuse is currently occurring right now unseen. In this way, it's crucial to consider that better safeguarding outcomes should first and foremost be driven by the identification and prevention of abuse in the first instance. Alas, the reality is that a significant proportion of child sexual abuse never reaches the criminal justice system at all. These children are not reflected in data sets or analytical frameworks based solely on convicted offenders. Therefore, it is worth remembering that while offender data has its place within a broader safeguarding landscape, it is not adequate as the central focus for protecting victims and preventing further abuse. Failing to consider this risks neglecting the hidden majority of cases and misdirecting our resources and attention. I will give way with pleasure.
As a fellow Scottish MP, he will know that sadly these gangs operate across all parts of the United Kingdom. Does he accept we need to have consistency with the collection of data in Scotland, in Wales, in England and in Northern Ireland as well?
Indeed. I thank the honourable member for his intervention. He has some knowledge, as do I indeed, of the situation north of the border. And I think the point, which I shall come to shortly, is well made, that this crime is no respective of whereabouts you might live in the United Kingdom whatsoever. So only by prioritising the identification of unreported abuse can we begin to address the true scale of the problem, rather than merely documenting its aftermath, the retrospective nature of it. What's more, the petition makes particular reference to gang-based crime. I'm sure many members will be aware of previous inquiries into this particular offence and the severity of it, which should not be undermined. However, we must absolutely remember that children can be sexually abused in many different ways by different people and in different places and situations, which is precisely, I think, a point my Scottish colleague was alluding to. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for the reasoned caveats that he is laying out. But in the case of Rotherham, and particularly in the case of gangs who are grooming and abusing young children, in my constituency, they were predominantly of Pakistani heritage. The reason that that mattered is, had we recognised that early on, we might have been able to disrupt and prevent some of the abuse. So I think in specific cases, we do need this data and we need to be transparent. And sometimes all the caveats in the world are just diluting what should be a laser focus on protecting children.
Wise words, indeed. Now, to turn to the point that my honourable friend touched on earlier, as we know, in England and Wales alone, almost half of all child sexual abuse offences reported to the police in 21 and 22 took place in the family environment. That means the abuse was by parents, siblings, grandparents, or anyone considered one of the family. After sexual abuse by parents, a harmful sexual behaviour can take place from siblings. It is the second most common form of sexual abuse within the family environment reported to police. So my point is that we must be cautious about framing child sexual abuse as primarily an external or culturally othered threat, when the evidence shows it is most often perpetrated within existing relationships of trust and care. In fact, I would suggest that overemphasising outside narratives risks distorting public understanding and can distract from the full range of context in which abuse does occur, thus preventing, I give way.
The honourable gentleman for giving way, and whilst I accept his wider point, given we are about to have a national grooming gang inquiry, which those of us on this side of the House had to drag the government kicking and screaming to do, would it not be helpful for that inquiry to have the data? Surely sunlight is the best disinfectant when it comes to this issue.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. Of course, the Minister will sum up from the government, and it will be interesting to see what the government's view on this debate is. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful.
Honourable gentleman,
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman giving way. I just want to make a small point, following the honourable lady's very strong and powerful point about the gang-related stuff. This motion that the public has voted for has not selectively gone for gangs only. It says all offenders, including gangs. Surely that is the key to get the knowledge, and that sunlight will help us solve those other crimes.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his intervention. I apologise for forgetting for an instant that he's a Privy Councillor, but I acknowledge that now. I believe that we must distinguish carefully between evidence-based policy and generalisation, between transparency and sensationalism, and between the legitimate scrutiny of institutional failings and the prejudiced stigmatisation of whole groups of people. In short, we have to treat this subject with great care. I give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. I was a prosecutor for 21 years before becoming an MP. I've prosecuted many perpetrators of violence against women and girls, including sexual offenders, and I have awareness that the CPS have inputted data on all manner of aspects of an offender, including ethnicity. I think data can be useful in terms of looking at patterns of offending, but also pockets of offending in particular areas. So would the member agree with me that it can be useful, but that each individual case needs to be looked at in terms of the evidence and prosecuting people based on the evidence rather than anything else, and that it's important that we prosecute as many offenders as the evidence will allow across the country, notwithstanding what their ethnicity, religion or nationality is. Anybody committing acts of violence against women and girls, including grooming gangs, should be prosecuted where the evidence allows.
I think, Deja, if I understand the intervention correctly, I would make the point that children can't look after themselves in this regard. It behoves every single adult to sort this out. So by having a conversation, by discussing the issue, and by going absolutely cross-party, that way we can improve responses and prevent further abuse and exploitation, I do believe. Now, I do see, I have accepted a rather large number of interventions that a lot of members would like to speak. So I will close at this point simply with this. It would be a great tragedy, in my view, if this issue became a part of political football. It should not be, because, as has been said earlier, sexual abuse is no observer of rank in society or geographic place where you live. It can affect everyone, from remotest parts of the UK to some of the most suburbanised parts. James Siobhan, I thank you.
Right. I remind members that should they wish to speak, they will need to bob. I just want to be sure I get a good idea of who wants to make a contribution, because we want to make sure that everybody has as long as they need to make their contribution. So we'll be doing that calculation now, and I call Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Dave Siobhan. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I want to begin by putting on record my thanks to the 651 constituents in Hartlepool who signed this petition. They are right to demand greater transparency and accountability from the institutions responsible for protecting children. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross for opening this debate in such a measured way. Let me be absolutely clear. Child sexual exploitation is one of the most vile, destructive and unforgivable crimes imaginable. It destroys lives, it shatters childhoods and leaves scars that never heal. It is a crime that demands from all of us the strongest possible response. And that word, unforgivable, I believe is important. And I make no apology for saying this, both as a member of this place and as a dad. For those convicted of the rape of a child, no punishment is too harsh. They should be chemically castrated. They should be given hard labour. And they should never be allowed to see another free day for the rest of what I would hope there would be their very miserable lives. There should be no ambiguity and no softness when it comes to protecting our children. I support wholeheartedly the intent of this petition: transparency, accountability and truth. Because where facts are missing, speculation, sometimes fostered by malign actors, fills the gap. And when trust in institutions break down, it is ordinary people, and most importantly, victims, who suffer. As we have already heard, sunlight is the great disinfectant. It matters. The public have a right to know the full picture of crime in their communities and how we intend to deal with it. Of course, there are practical challenges. As Baroness Casey has highlighted, some categories such as religion depend on self-declaration and may not always on that basis be particularly reliable. But those challenges are not a reason for inaction. They are a reason for getting the systems right, not for avoiding the issue altogether. Now, let me make a second point very clear. This debate must be about victims, not political point scoring, and not about narrowing or distorting the problem. Analysis by the police showed that in 2023, 115,000 children were victims of sexual abuse. The Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force identified 4,228 group-based offences in that same period, of which 1,125 were family abuse and 717 were sexual exploitation cases, which includes offences perpetrated by grooming gangs. Even if we accept that not all crimes will be recorded, that not all data will be accurate, that many crimes, as we've already heard today, will remain hidden, there is simply no doubt what these figures reveal. Group-based abuse is real and must be tackled without fear or favour. But these figures also show something broader and far more uncomfortable. This abuse takes many forms and happens in many settings. The most common offenders are not organised networks. They are tragically family members, trusted adults, friends of the family, neighbours and acquaintances. And in a growing number of cases, they are peers, children themselves under the age of 18. These are hard truths, but they are essential truths if we are to be serious about prevention. That is why we cannot afford a selective focus. Every victim matters. Every offender must be pursued. And every form of abuse must be confronted with equal seriousness. And it is also true, as we've already heard from my right honourable friend, that investigations of grooming gangs have identified instances where offenders come from a disproportionately ethnic minority background. That must be investigated and confronted without fear or favour wherever it occurs. And I trust that the independent inquiry already referenced, in my view, set up too slowly, although much faster than previous administrations, will do that. Because anyone found to be complicit in not dealing with these appalling crimes should be brought to justice with the severity of punishment it deserves. Yes.
As Home Secretary 3 years ago, I set up the Grooming Gangs Task Force, and in its first year, it led to 500 arrests and safeguarded over 4,000 girls. We're proud of that, but it wasn't nearly enough. But just for daring to tell the truth, that these were racialised crimes in places like Rotherham, perpetrated by largely Pakistani Muslim men against white girls, I was attacked for being Islamophobic, for amplifying a far-right narrative by, it has to be said, my own Conservative Party colleagues. Does the honourable gentleman agree that ethnicity reporting is absolutely essential if we are to combat the institutional fear that has taken over the police, social workers, schools, and parts of our media and political parties, and if we're to get justice for victims?
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, lady, for her contribution. And I would say very clearly that nobody should be castigated for highlighting the truth that is self-evident. And I think the most important thing here is that once the essence of this petition are taken up by government, and I hope that it will reveal a truth, that there is an issue with grooming gangs, and sometimes they come from particular ethnic minority backgrounds, but actually it will also reveal another truth. The vast majority of perpetrators are not, in fact, from grooming gangs. They are not, in fact, from ethnic minority backgrounds. And that's a truth that we have to get out into the open if we're to deal with it properly. Because I go back to the point I made before. If we are insistent on a narrative that tries to sow division in our country, that tries to be selective in our focus, then the only people who will lose are victims of this appalling crime. It is of genuine concern to me that we narrow the lens of this debate. Why else would we want less transparency, not more? Unless the goal is something other than protecting children. Unless narrowing the focus of this debate to only some crimes isn't about protecting children, but a tactic to weaponise this issue with a goal of promoting division, driving social media clicks, and furthering the individual political ambitions of certain members of this place. It is of genuine concern to me that this debate today has been promoted as a debate on grooming gangs, including the honourable member from Great Yarmouth in his place, who referred to it as a grooming gangs debate. That's not what the debate here is about. It is about all victims of child sexual abuse, about all data of all perpetrators, as we've already heard. And I noted this morning that the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth said that he was going to name and shame every member of Parliament who did not attend this debate. There are 650 members of Parliament in this place, and I believe there are 50 seats round this table. And I think temperance in our language would serve the victims of this crime far better than the language of the Honourable Member. It must never be weaponised. It must never be reduced to slogans or selective outrage. It must be about truth, accountability, and above all, justice for victims. So I say wholeheartedly, publish the data, show the truth, never forget the children we are duty-bound to protect. We owe them nothing less. Thank you.
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Firstly, I would like to thank the 260,974 British men and women who signed the petition to make this debate possible, and I want to welcome these brave survivors who are sitting behind us in the hall. This debate is about them. As you quite rightly say, it's not about politics. I want the world to hear what we heard during the 2 weeks of our independent rape gang inquiry hearings, an inquiry that should never have needed to happen. I sincerely urge this Parliament to listen to the testimonies from these brave survivors and to act, to finally act. So the first testimony: he took his pants down, penetrated me, had sex with me. He then stopped before ejaculation. He picked up the bottle of Jack Daniels, which was now empty, and he forced it up inside me. He broke the glass while he was there. At that point, I was about 12, nearly 13. Another testimony: I was held down by the men as they each took turns to orally and vaginally rape me, taking it in turns to pin down my arms and my legs. When the assault ended, the men hit me repeatedly, threatened to find me, kill me, and harmed my loved ones if I ever told anybody what had happened. Another: comments were constantly made suggesting that white girls, the Christian girls, were viewed as having fewer morals or lower values, whereas Muslim girls were described by some of the men as having dignity and higher moral standing. These comparisons were used to justify the way I was treated and to further humiliate and control me. Another: she was a white woman herself, who I imagine may have been groomed, and has obviously now married into the family, shouting obscenities at us. Throughout the whole sentencing, she was constantly saying, "Fucking liars, lying white bitches." She said to me that God will be the witness for what happens to me. Another: race did play a part and motivated the selection or demographic of the victims. Throughout my exploitation, the other girls I encountered, or who were abused alongside me, were almost exclusively white. Another: she had a baby by him, and his dad was an imam. His dad knew, and he got his son married and said that he wasn't allowed to see the child. They look after their own community. Another: over the course of the abuse, I was raped by multiple police officers in different parts of the country. Another: he put a cigarette out on the baby's face. Another: it started when I was 13. I was raped by probably about 600 or 700 different men over 3 years. Another: they would toot the horn of the car, and then a child would be taken to the front door by a staff member of the children's home. Another: I was bleeding from both my vagina and my back passage and was so swollen I could not sit down. I told hospital staff my drink had been spiked and I did not know what had happened because I was too afraid to tell the truth. They did not ask any questions. They gave me tablets and discharged me. I was 15 years old. Another: things would escalate around Eid and holidays. Parties got bigger, got worse, got more violent. More people involved, more girls involved. The parties were just bigger. Another: The main clash that I kind of had with the religion side of it was I grew up as a Christian. I would wear my cross because it was something really special to me. It was just used as a way to break me down. They said, "Where is your God now? Has your God forsaken you?" Another, it was all of the white girls in every home that I went to. I remember a man opening the back of a van and I saw 15, 20 girls locked in dog cages. Another, dogs were brought in and I couldn't move at all. I had nowhere to move. I think that was the scariest thing, was not having any concept of it. There were men around me, not horrified, not disgusted, not helping, but filming and laughing, making bets on whether the dog could actually rape me or not. And yes, I was raped by a dog. The man just held my face, stared me down straight in the eyes, and he wanted to see me break, and he did. Another, I just want it to stop and not happen to any other children, and for people to actually act, to do something and stop being so scared. I could continue for hours and hours. All of us in this building have a responsibility to finally act. Not to talk, but to act. Our Rape Gang Inquiry report will be released in the coming days. It will change Britain for good. Thank you.
Steve Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Almost 500 people in my constituency of Mansfield signed this petition, and many, many more constituents have written to me expressing their great, deep concern about child sexual exploitation, about grooming gangs, and the failure of our institutions to protect vulnerable children in our country. And I understand from them why this issue matters so profoundly to the public and why there is such a strong demand for transparency and accountability and action. Where child sexual exploitation has occurred, including in organised gang-based offending, the failures of our police forces, our councils and our safeguarding agencies have had absolutely devastating consequences. I'll gladly give way.
Thank you for giving way. When I was a county councillor in Nottinghamshire, I asked the Children's and Young People's Committee on a number of occasions where child exploitation in Notts was taking place, what age group it was affecting, what genders, and I was publicly and both privately denied that information. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that child exploitation concerns should never be dismissed, victims must be believed, and institutions must be willing to confront the truth, no matter how uncomfortable they may find it? Truth, transparency, accountability, that's how we protect our children.
Steve Young.
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for Sherwood Forest for her intervention. And of course, I wholeheartedly agree with the views that she's expressed. I think too often our vulnerable children were failed, absolutely failed, because our institutions worried more about reputational damage and about political sensitivity and about some kind of corrupted political correctness, rather than about protecting working class boys and girls from harm. Yes, I'll happily give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way, and we absolutely need transparency on who the perpetrators are. But we must also confront the systemic failure that let the grooming gangs abuse continue for years. These children were not believed. They were dismissed by the police. They were overlooked by the health services. They were failed by the local authorities who were supposed to be their corporate parents who should have kept them safe. It's a profound institutional failure. So does he agree that today we must also ask why these children were ignored and who will be held accountable for these devastating failures?
Steve Young.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and of course I agree with her. Parliament should never be in a position where we shy away from confronting those failures with absolute honesty and absolutely critical. But equally, I would say to the honourable lady, we must approach this issue with a great deal of care and evidence, and I think proportion as well. I looked at the crime survey for England and Wales. It estimates that around about 7 to 8% of adults experienced some form of sexual abuse before the age of 16, around about 3 million people. And it shows that that abuse is most commonly perpetrated by someone already known to the child. And other members have alluded to this, a family member, acquaintance, often trusted adults, family friends, and in fact, a growing proportion of abuse now takes place online. It matters, and it's an important issue to raise in this debate because that majority of child sexual abuse in this country doesn't take place in the form of organised group offending. So as grooming gang cases are amongst the most serious, heinous, disturbing forms of abuse, as we've already heard, they're not the totality, and I think it's important, as many other members have spoken today, that we reflect the totality of child sexual exploitation in Britain today. We shouldn't narrow our national understanding of this crime to a single form of offending, where we might risk reflecting on where harm is actually occurring. Now, that does not mean that we should avoid difficult questions where patterns or clusters of offending emerge. On the contrary, I think we should be prepared to follow the evidence honestly. I don't think we've always done that. Often we have not. And I'll happily give way to the honourable member. And I'll take the final intervention from him. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very conscious of the headline of the debate, which is child sexual offender data. I'm conscious that in Northern Ireland we've unfortunately had sexual abuse through some of the churches and organisations. There's things that have happened in Northern Ireland. And if we're going to have a child offender data, then it's really important that the data is shared between those in Northern Ireland, those in Scotland, those in Wales and those in England, in case some of those perpetrators should move within those venues, as perhaps they have in the past. That's why it's important to have the data. Does he agree it's really important that all of the regions share the data to ensure wherever the perpetrators will be, what they've done, they'll be accountable?
Yeah. Well, I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and he's making a profoundly important point, which I completely agree with, as you might expect. So I think we have to take on those difficult questions and prepared to follow that evidence, including all of those questions around nationality and ethnicity and immigration status and religion, where those factors can be properly recorded and they're operationally relevant. Of course, we should do so. But I think that information always has to be treated carefully, interpreted responsibly, understood within the wider safeguarding environment. This data should help protect children. It should not become a substitute for serious safeguarding policy. And that's why I think that any approach to statutory data collection has to be rooted in thinking about operational safeguarding. It should not be approached in the light of symbolism or political pressure or other types of political correctness. I think that good data helps public authorities identify children at risk earlier, allocates resources, understands patterns of offending, and allows us to intervene so that less children are harmed. And ultimately, for me, this debate comes down to trust. I think people in my constituency in Mansfield want confidence back that institutions that serve them are honest, are competent, are focused above all else on protecting children, and they want consistency in safeguarding and accountability where there are failures, and reassurance that no category of abuse is ignored, minimised, or politically inconvenient for anyone. So I understand the motives behind the petition. I wholeheartedly support the petition, but I believe that any statutory requirement that we make has to be based on evidence, it has to be operationally meaningful, it has to be focused genuinely on improving child protection, not driven by any type of incomplete narrative. Above all, I would say to every other member here today, our duty, as other members have pointed out, in this House is very, very simple. It is to protect children, to learn from past failures, and to ensure that every form of child sexual abuse is confronted with the seriousness and honesty and resolve that it demands.
Yeah.
Esther McVeigh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a real pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, Dame Siobhan. And I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for Caithness, Sutherland and East Ross for moving the motion today. And I'd also like to thank the very many people who signed this petition, including 435 from my own constituency of Tatton, who helped secure this important debate today. And I welcome today's debate, but it is deeply disappointing that such a debate is needed. And we are only here because of the outcry from the public, outraged by a government and public institutions that continue to shy away from questions on ethnicity, immigration status and religion. And if we go back to Baroness Casey's audit on group-based child sexual exploitation and abuse reported in June last year, it concluded that catastrophic, systematic failures and institutional inaction had allowed grooming gangs to operate freely for many years. Recommendation 4 stated that the government should rightly mandate the collection of ethnicity and nationality data for all suspects in child sexual abuse. I will indeed.
Smith.
Great progress. I just want to point out an absolute which is clear as to why this is necessary. I noticed that in 22, the Home Office asked police forces to collect the ethnicity data and other data to therefore have display and evidence. Out of 43 forces, only 1 complied. That's why it has to be statutory and enforced. Does you not agree?
Well, that is shameful, and I'm delighted my right honourable friend brought that up. And that is why it is essential that today's debate rectifies that situation. Now, missing from Dame Casey's recommendations were the vital need for data collection on religion and immigration status, factors that surely need to be understood so that, if found to be related to higher offending, strategies for protecting children can be that much more targeted and effective. As Baroness Casey acknowledges in her audit, for too long the authorities have shied away from the ethnicity of people involved, and it is blindness, ignorance and prejudice that had led to repeated failures over decades to properly investigate cases. If we had complete and consistent data, we would be able to answer more questions with greater accuracy. Are certain types of exploitation increasing? How are offenders operating? Are certain ethnic backgrounds more likely than others to commit certain sorts of crimes? If we understand what patterns exist, we can improve policing and bring more survivors the justice they deserve and stop these horrendous crimes happening again. In addition, these questions need to be answered too. Why are institutions so adverse to collecting and reporting such data? The J report in 2014 documented reluctance to discuss offender ethnicity openly. We know the Labour-run councils of Rotherham, perfectly timed.
I'm really grateful that she's
Sarah
referring
Champion.
to the J report into Rotherham, and she will also be aware that the frontline staff were gathering that data. It was the management and the upper echelons that were blocking it, and I think the honourable member is absolutely right. Why did that happen, and what were the consequences? And I would put to her, not much.
I want to thank the honourable member for her intervention and all the work that she has done on this matter over many years, and the abuse that she went through for standing up for those girls. I will indeed give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and I think a point that flows from what the member for Rotherham has said and the important case that she is making is one of the key elements of transparency is around the patterns of behaviour in covering up these crimes. So both the patterns in terms of offenders, but we also need this transparency if we are to see where these crimes were covered up and what patterns lay within that.
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point, because it is only then that we can root out why people fail to investigate. Was it fear? Was it frightened to be called racist or whatever it was, or even frightened to be called far right? Why were these cases not investigated? And the other question I want to raise, is it a culture of political correctness that has been thriving, particularly in some of these Labour councils like Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford and Oldham, and other agencies like the police that have dodged the hard questions? Why? Because they were worried it might reveal something that didn't fit their ideology of multiculturalism. Shockingly, Baroness Casey concluded in her audit last year that questions about ethnicity have been dodged for years. And after a 6-month wait, the government responded to the Casey audit. All of the recommendations were accepted. But here we are 6 months on from that, and a full year since the audit was published, still waiting for implementation. So will the Minister today give an update on this and let us know when we can expect data to be published? We have also seen how the government's official inquiry into grooming gangs has not only moved at a glacial pace, but has also appointed one of their own, a Labour peer, to chair it, and involved a former council chief executive and a chair of the NHS Foundation Trust as panel members. Exactly what the survivors expressly said they did not want to happen, handing the inquiry over to people from the very institutions under investigation. Meanwhile, the honourable member for Great Yarmouth has got on with the job and has put the government to shame with his independent rape inquiry, which heard 10 days of evidence in February and will report the finding next week. And I don't know if the word is fortunate enough to be a part of that panel, but when asked, I accepted it. And quite honestly, it was horrifying what we were told. Horrendous stories of rape. And it wasn't just rape, although that's bad enough. It was torture. Women battered, strangled, cut, whipped until they were close to death, and then brought back round to be raped again, over a sustained period of time, because nobody wanted to believe what they said when they reached out to the institutions that should have been looking after them. Some reaching out to the children's homes they were in, paid thousands of pounds a week and a year to look after them, and they were let down. Why? Because they were white, working-class girls, many vulnerable that people did not want to listen to and call them literally white trash. And they allowed others, elders they saw in a community, to be above reproach, and therefore they did not investigate at all. In summary, if we want to successfully end these appalling sexual crimes against children, we must fully understand what is happening. And to do that, we need the data. It is not racist to examine the ethnicity of these criminals, nor is it discriminatory to examine their immigration status. We must follow the evidence wherever it leads, no matter how uncomfortable the truth of it is. These awkward conversations must finally be had, and anyone who might be avoiding them because of self-serving sense of political correctness must now decide to put the safety of children first. This is not a political football, a right-wing bandwagon, or a dog whistle issue. This is about life-altering suffering and abuse of the most shocking kind. Suffering and abuse that could have been prevented, and the survivors deserve to know the truth about the failings that was allowed to happen. I would hope that all of us here today can agree that the only thing that really matters is protecting children, and that we must do everything to put them first.
Ayub Khan.
I want to begin where every debate on this subject must begin, with the victims and survivors of child sexual abuse, like some of the brave women that are here sat in this hall. There are few crimes more devastating, and there are few duties more important for this House than ensuring that every perpetrator is identified, convicted, and punished with the full force of the law. So let me be clear at the outset. I support the proper collection and publication of data that helps us understand patterns of offending, close gaps in safeguarding, improve prosecution, and protect children. As a barrister, I believe in evidence. I believe in facts. I believe that the criminal justice system must follow the evidence, wherever it leads, regardless of whether those facts are convenient or uncomfortable. But I also believe we must be honest about what some people are doing with this issue. Because there is a difference between using data to protect children and using children as a shield for prejudice. There is a difference between seeking transparency and seeking a radicalized political weapon. And I'm afraid that around this petition, around this wider debate, there are some voices who appear far less interested in victims than they are in validating their own hatred of ethnic minorities, Muslims, migrants, and foreign nationals. That is not safeguarding. That is not justice. That is exploitation of another kind. We have to be incredibly careful here, because the facts simply do not support the narrative that some would like to peddle. The data currently collected by the police is undoubtedly incomplete, and I welcome serious efforts to rectify that. But it's simply not true to suggest that we are operating in a complete evidential vacuum. The Ministry of Justice already records ethnicity and nationality data for those convicted and held within the prison estate. And while more up-to-date figures would of course be welcome, the available data show that as of 2020, more than 88% of prisoners serving sentences for sexual offences with an associated child sexual abuse offence were white. Fewer than 6% were Asian, and fewer than 0.5% had no stated ethnicity. That is a relatively complete data set. And on those figures, white men are significantly represented. Yet no serious person in this House would argue that white people are inherently more likely to commit child sexual abuse because of their ethnicity, culture, or background. And rightly so, because it would be obscene policy and an obscene politics to draw sweeping conclusions about communities of millions from the crimes around 16,000 of the most depraved individuals in our society. So when people insist on doing exactly that to Pakistani, Muslim, Asian or migrant communities, they are not following the evidence. They are revealing a prejudice. They are not interested in protecting children. They're interested in blaming communities. That does not mean we ignore cases involving Asian men, Muslims, foreign nationals, or anyone else. It means the opposite. It means we investigate all of it. It means we prosecute all of it. It means we do not allow any community to hide behind discomfort, political embarrassment, or fear of reputational damage. But it also means we reject the grotesque idea that rape, abuse, or groomings are the product of select or even inferior ethnicities, religions, or nationalities. These are crimes committed by human beings. They are rooted in power, misogyny, coercion, and the exploitation of vulnerability. They are not committed by just Muslims, migrants, and minorities. Far from it. And if we are going to talk about consistency, well, let's talk about consistency. When John Ashby raped a Sikh woman in Warsaw, he did so while directing Islamophobic abuse at her because he believed she was Muslim. That was not incidental. It was part of the terror inflicted on the victim. Yet many of the very people who are usually desperate to talk about ethnicity and religion suddenly changed their view. They said rape is rape. They criticized media outlets for making it about religion. Suddenly the victim's identity and the hate-driven nature of the attack was cleansed and downplayed. But when the perpetrator is Asian, Muslim or foreign, those same people insist that identity is everything. That is not a concern for victims. That is selective outrage. When the victim is from a minority community, they tell us not to mention her race or religion. When the perpetrator is from a minority community, they tell us his race or religion explains the crime. That double standard should shame anyone who claims to care about justice. And I say this plainly. Celebrating or minimizing the rape of women because she's Sikh or because she's presumed to be a Muslim is vile. Denying religiously or racially aggravated nature of such a crime is vile. It is not British. It is not patriotic. And it's not about protecting women and girls. I support better data collection. But unlike some, I do so because I'm consistent and because facts matter. I support it because bad data creates a vacuum, and that vacuum is either filled by denial or by hatred, and we should not tolerate either. The government must ensure that ethnicity and nationality data is collected accurately, consistently, and nationally. It must ensure that safeguarding agencies share intelligence properly. It must ensure the victims and survivors are believed, supported, and protected. It must ensure that local authorities, police forces, schools, health services, and prosecutors cannot fail children because they are afraid of asking difficult questions. The victims of child sexual abuse deserve better than to be turned into ammunition in a culture war. They deserve justice, and above all, they deserve honesty. They deserve a system that is brave enough to collect the facts and decent enough not to twist those facts into bigotry. So let us have transparency, let us collect the data, and let us publish what can properly and safely be published. But we must do it for the right reason, to support survivors and to bring offenders to justice, not to feed hatred or attribute these crimes to certain communities. This is a problem that everyone in our society shares and a problem that we all bear. It belongs to all of us to prevent it, and it belongs to members to confront it with facts, consistency and compassion. Thank you, Chair.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whilst today's debate is very welcome, it's on the broad range of sexual offences against children and the gathering of data of the perpetrators, I would suggest, and certainly my constituents in Clacton would suggest, that there is something uniquely evil and awful about mass rape gangs. That's not to diminish in any way sexual abuse that may happen in the home by trusted people or elsewhere, but something uniquely evil about what is going on. And I can certainly talk for many of my constituents in saying that there is a feeling that because of racial sensitivities, the authorities at all levels for a couple of decades now have not done the job of genuinely pursuing justice. I was unaware of this problem, the scale of this problem and the cover-up until the Rotherham by-election in 2012, where the current member was elected. And may I say, she has spoken out more bravely on this issue than most members of this House in the intervening years. I was genuinely shocked by the stories that I was being told by families that came forward, stunned that the police, social workers, local councillors had received multiple reports of what had happened. And when I say mass rape, we're talking in some cases about individual girls being raped by hundreds of men over a period of time. Something genuinely shocking had happened. Now, in the intervening years, we've had the Jay report, the Casey report, attempts by Home Secretaries, current attempts to find out the truth about what has gone on. And whilst a handful of people have been held to account, the truth is that the vast majority haven't. I was surprised that during 14 years of Conservative government, we did not have a proper judicial inquiry with the necessary powers. I've done my best to encourage the current Prime Minister to do the same, but sadly to no avail. There are two things that strike me that would be helpful. One is we ought to get published with redacted names all of the reports from police and social services over the last 40 years across the whole of the country, published as a public record that everybody can read. But the thing, Madam Chair, that really surprises me is the reluctance of members of Parliament to realise their own powers. We're in the Palace of Westminster. We're in this remarkable historic building. We're all privileged to be here. We have enormous powers. They were last effectively used back in 2011 by the Public Accounts Committee, who in the wake of the global financial collapse of 2008 used the powers within this palace to turn committees into courts. And that means they have the powers of subpoena. It means that people can be brought into committee rooms like this under the oath and could face perjury if they don't tell the truth. So my suggestion, Madam Chair, is rather than waiting for this Home Secretary or the next one that may come soon, who knows, to act in a way that would be with full judicial power and the ability to subpoena, why don't we as members of Parliament forget party affiliation, recognise the upset and concern and fear of our constituents that we're increasingly living in a two-tier justice system in this country, and come together and force the government to have a powerful committee in this place. And let's call the heads of social services. Let's call senior police officers. Let's call councillors, former or serving, or even former or serving MPs, and get to the truth. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, David Siobhan, and thank you to my honourable and gallant friend for bringing this motion forward. At the heart of this issue are exploited children and predatory men. Sexual exploitation of children continues to occur across the country. It is not exclusive to a particular skin tone, an individual culture, nor religion, but leaders and those in authority must acknowledge and address patterns. Who are any of us to deny the testimonies of the victims as so heavily laid out by the member for Great Yarmouth? Those with responsibility must feel empowered to act in defence of women and girls without fear of persecution or judgment, nor of prosecution through the Equality Act. It should not take a humanist to recognise that various interpretations of the Quran, the Hadiths, the Torah, and the biblical Old Testament continue to validate varying degrees of female subjugation. Malala Yousafzai was shot by religious fundamentalists in Pakistan for daring to advocate for girls' education. Therefore, where exploitation has taken place by groups entirely comprised men of Pakistani heritage, there can be no pretense that culture did not factor in their subjugation of these women and girls. Now, I am proud that the UK leads much of the world in our elevation of women. I'm equally proud of the enrichment which cultural diversity has brought to our own. But why pretend that integration is frictionless, or that any two cultures are perfectly compatible? The rational amongst us would want integration to take place, so let us not take it for granted. Where there is incompatibility between cultures in this country, no inch should ever be given which would undermine the rights of women and girls. I didn't see where it came from, but it'd be a pleasure.
For giving way, but it's
Gillian
very.
Smith.
This issue is very real. We had very close to here a fun run organised by Tower Hamlets Council that did not allow women over 13 to join in. So I totally agree with what he's saying, but let's be clear, it's happening frequently, and it's happening very, very close to where we're having this debate.
I thank him for his intervention. I have to say I'm not entirely familiar with the specific instance that he's laid out, but certainly it is ongoing today and across the country. The reasonable amongst us must not avoid these uncomfortable societal issues. We must never leave the floor open and unchallenged to racists and white supremacists who unfairly denigrate demographics at large for the crimes of a few. It is the absence of reasonable voices, in the absence of reasonable voices, that this issue has been weaponised by the far right and deployed by their propagandists to sow racial, cultural and religious division. I will.
Thank you for giving way.
Hannah Spencer.
As has been raised, these women and girls, why were they never believed? I have had one constituent whose sister was a victim of grooming gangs and tragically died from HIV contracted as a result of that abuse. Another constituent wanted me to be here today because all too often this conversation is dominated by men. And the women who were sexually abused and exploited as children by grooming gangs deserve to have their voices heard.
Spencer, if you could sit down.
Thank
I appreciate that you're very new to this House, and it's great that you're at this debate. And I am noted that you will be making a speech later, and there will be time. But what you're doing at the moment is having an intervention. So that needs to be really brief. Yeah. Yeah, good.
So Indivision will not keep children safe, but does he agree that the next steps must be guided by listening to survivors and by fostering a culture in which women and girls are believed? Thank you.
I fully endorse her comments, and I often feel self-conscious bringing this issue forward as a man when really we should be listening to the voices of women and girls, particularly, of course, those who have been victims of these crimes. Victims of domestic and sexual abuse, exploitation and trafficking deserve to be treated with compassion and with sincerity. Their tragedies should not be a foundation over which clamber opportunistic and ambitious politicians desperate to score political points over their opponents, as did the Conservative Party in January 2025. It is a continuing tragedy that these cases are most vociferously contested by thugs who attack police and defile our national emblems, by political opportunists and by hostile foreign commentators who call for civil war and violent uprisings against the elected government. They rarely, if ever, consider the victims. Social media commentators periodically ask me, "What are you doing about grooming gangs?" They never ask me what I'm doing for the victims. Elon Musk's interest in the 2024 summer riots and the unimaginable crimes they followed was not in the protection of women and girls. Rather, it was based upon his apartheid nostalgic white supremacism. Musk's concern for women and girls only extends to his own attempt to exploit them, as evidenced through his reluctantly public exchanges with sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. That brings me to the member for Great Yarmouth, and again I feel self-conscious for delivering this from behind him. Despite Musk's relationship with paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, the member for Great Yarmouth continues to publicly court him, and last year he was paid £40,000 by Elon Musk through his platform X, the same platform over which Musk provoked those riots in 2024. In closing, Dame Siobhan, let us bring forward this motion. Let the evidence show that I'm sure most sexual abuse of this kind does occur within the family, but let the evidence show where it does not, and let us act upon it as one.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I congratulate the honourable member for Caithness, Sunderland, Sutherland and Easter Ross for bringing forward this debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee, and also the lead petitioner and the many campaigners who have fought tirelessly and continue to fight for justice for the victims of child sexual exploitation. This petition is asking for a statutory requirement on councils, on the police, on the Crown Prosecution Service and all other related institutions to collect, record and publish the nationality, ethnicity, immigration status and religion of child sexual offenders, including gang-based crime. Rightly so. It believes that to properly protect children and prevent the mistake of the past, it is essential to collect and record all the information as I have stated. And I agree with this petition, because this petition states that data would protect children and inform public policy and allow for better understanding of offenders' demographics, ensure transparency and support targeted safeguarding strategies. The petition also states that without this information, critical patterns may be missed, weakening efforts to prevent abuse and protect vulnerable children. And I also agree with this narrative, and I join the over 260,000 people who have took the time to sign this petition. Whilst I appreciate this petition covers several areas, I would like to start, Madam Chairman, by focusing on the importance of retention of data in the cases of grooming gangs and child sexual exploitation. Because published in June last year, Baroness Casey, rightly so, recommended a full national inquiry into grooming gangs. And as part of her recommendation, set out clearly on page 151, Baroness Casey rightly said that it should be mandated for all local authorities, police forces and other relevant agencies to retain all relevant records. Any relevant evidence or data that could help the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry should be retained, and the government should be mandated to inform that retention. And it was through many backwards and forwards with various Home Office officials, with even the previous Permanent Secretary to the Home Office, the previous Safeguarding Minister and the previous and the current Home Secretary herself, that I learnt that it took the Home Office 212 days to issue that direction to our police forces and other key Home Office agencies, instructing them to preserve those records after Baroness Casey's report was published in June of last year. That's nearly 7 months after the publication came out. I then learnt, Madam Chairman, that it was 8 months for the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to write, it took them to write to local authorities with that same instruction. That is staggering failure at the heart of this government as a result of a key recommendation that came out from Baroness Casey. So my first question to the Minister is, why such a delay? And secondly, what kinds of records were likely lost, potentially destroyed in the 7 months that it took the Home Office to issue the specific instruction to the police officers, forces, the 8 months it took MHCLG to issue the same instruction to local authorities? And this question is worthy of asking. Why? Because the reality is there are many local authorities up and down the country which resisted more openness and transparency on this issue for years, for decades, including Bradford Council, where my constituency is within. Other key issues when it comes to the lack of data in cases of organised child grooming gangs is the lack of data, not only itself, but the certain types of data. In her audit, Baroness Casey stated the appalling lack of data on ethnicity in crime recording alone is a major failing in the last decade or more. Questions about ethnicity have been asked but dodged for years. Child sexual exploitation is horrendous, whoever commits it, but there has not been enough but there have been enough convictions across the country of groups of men of Asian ethnic backgrounds who have warranted closer examination. And Madam Chairman, I have seen that for myself in my own constituency of Keighley, within the Bradford district, where the vast majority of convictions that have taken place have been of an Asian men of ethnic background, predominantly against white young girls. And we have to be sensible when we're talking about this issue. because, as Baroness Casey rightly found in her report, her audit that came out, only 37% of suspects had their ethnicity data recorded. That is simply not good enough, and why it was a key recommendation by Baroness Casey. So I welcome the recommendation that the government is mandating the collection of ethnicity and nationality data of all suspects in child sexual abuse and criminal exploitation cases. I only wish that it had come sooner. In my view, that very same approach should apply to immigration status and religion as well, as not only of the victim, but of the perpetrator as well, so we can get to grips of the complexity of this issue. We now have a national inquiry that is taking place. We understand that those local areas are going to be announced by the 13th of July this year. But why on earth is it taking so long? And I want to commend the work that has been done by the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth. But what I would like to understand is that information being fed in to the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry that is being led by Baroness Longfield? And has that information that the inquiry has been collecting been fed in to that inquiry now? Because it is crucial that that information is being considered. And I will give way.
I met with the panel of the rape gang inquiry just a few months ago, and I did ask that the honourable member's information from his inquiry be passed on to them, and they did agree on that.
And I will take the next information as well.
I think it's a very good point that you make, and we have been in touch with everybody, the government and Baroness Longfield, and we have said that we will help them, but so far nobody's actually made contact with me.
Well, Madam Chairman, the point being is all of us have duty in this place to represent our constituents and feed any information that we have to Baroness Longfield as the chair of the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry, so we can make sure that not only now those terms of reference have been set, but those local inquiries that form part of that national inquiry take place in the right areas. And that brings me on to the key point that I would like to make, that Keighley and the wider Bradford district, an area where people for far too long have been ignored and abandoned both at a local and national level, for years have fought hard for our area to be included. Fought hard but ignored. And since I was first elected to this place, representing the people of Keighley and Ilkley, I have stood alongside victims and survivors such as Fiona Goddard, and leading child abuse lawyers like David Greenwood, calling for one simple thing: for a full independent inquiry to take place across Keighley and the wider Bradford district. But because these heinous crimes did happen, and they are happening right now. Child sexual exploitation and gang-related grooming have haunted communities that I represent for decades. Lives have been shattered, trust has been broken, and far too often, those crying out for justice has been met with silence. So I ask the Minister my second question. Will she today announce that Keighley and the wider Bradford district will be included as part of the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry? Because if the government were confident enough in January of 2025 to announce that Oldham would be included, why on earth is the government not confident enough today to announce that Keighley and the wider Bradford district will be included? Because as I have said many a time before, I fear that the scale of the issue across the district, the Bradford district, will dwarf that of the likes of Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford and Oldham, where previous inquiries have taken place. Bradford has been referenced a lot in child sexual exploitation, and many of those victims and survivors have unfortunately been trafficked through the city. So therefore, I would like to hear a positive response from the Minister today. And my final point, just want to reference, is about the cost of the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry. The government have allocated £65 million to that inquiry, but we are yet to understand which local areas will form part of that national inquiry. So my third question to the Minister is, will the government look at expanding the amount of allocation of funds to the National Grooming Gang Inquiry above the £65 million if the National Chair, Baroness Longfield, deems that more money is needed because more areas need to be looked at to form part of that inquiry, and I will give way.
I thank my constituents neighbour for giving way, and could I pay tribute to the amazing work he has done over many, many years on this issue. Just on the point of expanding and the need for money, one example is taxi networks in the north of England, and taxi networks operating in Bradford and Keighley are operating in my area of Skipton and Ripon, and that will be one example where analysing broader issues properly will require more money and more funding.
And I completely concur with the point that the Right Honourable Member is making, because what I would not want to see is the government's independent inquiries restricted by the amount of funds that has been allocated to it. We need to make sure that this is robust, transparent and open, and that no stone is left unturned. I will give way.
Honourable Member for giving way, and I agree with much of what he said and the importance of gathering data. But one thing that has not really come out in this debate very much is an acknowledgement of the significant cuts to public services over the last decade, including cuts to youth services. I was a youth worker in Norfolk for many years and lead for child protection, decimated by cuts over the last decade, and it's youth workers that very often spot signs of abuse and stop it. So I wonder if he's calling for additional funding, whether he would support money for youth work across the country in areas where there are hotspots so that we can protect children.
I absolutely concur with the points that the Honourable Member is making. Youth services is one of those key indicators where many of those individuals that maybe work for local authorities are having a level of engagement with those victims, those survivors, and those that are doing the level of outreach. And of course, they have a safeguarding responsibility here, an ability to spot those signs. So if this is one of those mechanisms, and there is a call that funding is an issue for certain local authorities, then yes, of course, if it is absolutely resulting in the right outcomes. The final point, Madam Chairman, that I would like to make is there is always much focus on the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry, and it seems that there is less focus on the ICSA report, which was an excellent piece of work that was done by Professor Alexis Jay, which came out with 22 recommendations. But here we are, now 22 months into this government, and only 6 of those 22 recommendations have been taken place. Now, I fully acknowledge that there was 20 months after under the previous administration where there was not enough progress taking place under the ICSA recommendations before the general election was called after the report came out in 2022. But we are now 22 months into this new government. And my fourth question that I'd like to ask the Minister is what additional progress is the government making on implementing all of those 22 ICSA recommendations? So I want to conclude by acknowledging and welcoming the progress that has been made. And I'll take my final intervention.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Some of those recommendations from the Jay report that have been implemented by this government were included in the police and crime bill that came before the House recently. How did he vote?
The police and crime bill that came before the House did not go anywhere near far enough in providing the safeguarding mechanisms to protect the innocent, to protect those vulnerable victims and survivors like that have experienced heinous crimes of child sexual exploitation. I will not be voting for poor, badly thought through legislation by this government, and therefore I would like to ask the Minister, out of the 22 recommendations, what additional progress is going to be made beyond the 6 that have been put in place so far? And I would like to conclude there, Madam Chairman, by finally advocating that the Minister includes Bradford and Keighley as part of the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry.
Hannah Spencer? Okay. Sorry, Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Chairman. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. This petition calls on councils, police, the CPS to publish their child sexual offender data. And that's the nationality, the ethnicity, the immigration status, and the religion. And I can't emphasize the importance of this in terms of making sure that the victim's voice is heard. And I'd like to use an example that has come, an historical example that has come from my constituency, for the Sikh community who came forward when the child rape gang scandal was being brought forward in the news. And so many of my Sikh constituents came to me in tears, publicly in tears, and they said, we came forward saying that our girls were being raped, that they were being targeted in schools, we were trying to protect them, and we were told by the police, by politicians, by the media that it was an Asian problem and we just needed to deal with it within our own community. They were ignored because no one wanted to listen to them, because it was Pakistani Muslims that were attacking their girls. They were trying to do things to protect them, and they were ignored. Historically ignored and told it was an Asian problem that they could deal with themselves. And I wasn't the MP at the time, but I have dealt with cases and historic cases that have come to me, and I would be remiss not to mention why I believe that it is vital that the religion, the immigration status, and the ethnicity and the nationality is mentioned in reporting, because how can we target specific areas of criminality if we do not know those key details? And another example, historic example that I will use is a girl before I was an MP who was abducted, raped, and killed in an area where I was a counselor. And this person who committed the crime was from an Eastern European country where they were exporting sort of their criminals, letting them out of prison, and they were either able to go to the UK or they could go back into prison. And those were their choices. And so we were getting a huge number of sexual offenders, murderers coming to the UK, and without having the ethnic data to record that in the police stations in where crimes were being committed, we could not link those things together. If Interpol wasn't releasing that information, we weren't actually aware of that crime. And that is why it is essential that we publish this information, because if we're looking at mass rape gangs, and if we're looking at the protection of group-based child sexual exploitation, that's a very specific kind of exploitation. The member for Great Yarmouth spoke about the horrific and sadistic abuse and torture that these girls have endured. No one wants to hear these things out loud. It is disgusting, it is an abomination, it is a shame and a blight on our country. And we would be remiss of those victims if we did not do everything in our power to hold up the rule of law and to make sure that any targeted ethnic or religious groups that were targeting these girls would be brought to justice. If this was a Catholic rape gang or a Protestant rape gang or something like that, we would be shouting from the rooftops that something needed to be done. We need to be honest about what is happening. We need to be honest about where these abuses are taking place, why they're taking place, and what ethnic and religious groups are targeting our young women. I will give way.
She's making a fantastic speech, that the public perception of much of these horrific crimes is that it's a northern towns issue. But as we've seen in London, there are also young girls and women that have been historically abused, and it's disgraceful that people in authority in London still are in denial that these crimes are happening here in our capital city.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point. London has had horrific abuses. I worked with a girl who the Children's Society intervened on. She had been gang raped, she'd been exploited, she'd been moved from local authority to local authority. It had been covered up. And we are not addressing these things because we have been drowning in a sea of political correctness, and we are afraid to call out the truth. And it is, I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I know that everybody here and the nearly 500 people from my constituency who signed this petition will be struck by the gravity of the terrible crimes that have been committed up and down the country. Does she share my fear that when justice is only delivered years or even decades later, that should make us all ask uncomfortable questions about what might be happening on the streets in our own constituencies today, however difficult? Yeah.
We do need to ask those questions, and we need to be unafraid to stand up for the girls who have been raped, exploited, and lied to. And let down by the local authority, let down by political correctness, gone mad, actually. And we have forgotten who we are there to protect, which are the victims, which are the girls. And no matter how unpleasant this truth is, we need to face it. And we need to face, whether it be Pakistani gangs, whether it be other ethnic groups, we need to face this in the broad light of day, and we need to make sure that the victims' voices are heard. Thank you.
Well done.
Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the member for Caithness and to the lead petitioner for helping to organise the debate today. Thousands of young girls had their childhood stolen from them in the most evil way imaginable. Obscene crimes. It is hard to think of more depraved acts than those that were committed by the men involved. I've struggled at times, as many have, to read the court transcripts that have been put into the public domain. And every time, my mind has always turned to my own girls, thinking about them and what could have happened to any of the children that we know and love. It is truly hard to comprehend. And it's not in the past tense. This is almost certainly still happening in communities across our country. I'd like to praise, to thank, to honour those girls, women, who've chosen to speak out, to be whistleblowers, to campaign, and to do so to this very day. They'll never get their childhoods back. The scars will never fully heal, if at all. Their bravery is truly extraordinary. I'd like to pay tribute to those members of Parliament who've raised this issue. Many would say too few, many would say too late, but there have been members of Parliament on all sides of the House who have done so. The member for Rotherham, the member for Keighley, the member for Fareham and Waterlooville, who was here a few moments ago, and others. And in each of those cases, they were often attacked, insulted, denigrated, accused of being xenophobic or racist, when actually they were right, and they were doing what is our duty as members of Parliament, to shine a light on the great social injustices facing our country. I'd like to pay tribute to Adam Wren, who is the Director of Open Justice, who is campaigning for transparency in our legal system, and whose work to uncover and publish court transcripts propelled this issue back into the national conversation last year. It was only when many people read extracts from those court transcripts that they really understood what had actually happened, that grooming gangs was a euphemism, which didn't come close to capturing what was really going on and the appalling crimes that were happening. And of course, I'd like to thank all of those who signed the petition, including those in my own Newark constituency. That has led to this debate, and given the unanimous view expressed by members in the House today, I hope it leads to action by the government that will be supported by everybody across this chamber. In March 2024, I tabled an amendment to the Criminal Justice Bill that mandated an annual report be laid before Parliament on the nationality, visa and asylum status of every offender convicted in England and Wales in the previous 12 months. It attracted cross-party support, but the then Conservative government opposed it. Last year, I tabled a similar amendment, again with cross-party support. It too failed, this time because of opposition from the present government. I hope that the petition today being debated can be the catalyst to make this third time lucky, and that we ensure this issue is settled once and for all. The statutory requirement being suggested in this instance relates specifically to child sexual offenders and gang-based crime, which I naturally support. And I see no good reason why it shouldn't be applied to all crimes. As the petition argues, once the government routinely publishes the data, it will show offender demographics. which will allow policies that target the right people. It should give people the confidence to talk about these appalling crimes without fearing the backlash from spurious accusations of racism or xenophobia, accusations so many have faced. I will give way.
Member for giving way. There should be no person of any colour, creed, religion or community or position of power who should be allowed to get away with heinous crimes and using sex as a weapon. So when the honourable member talks about there being nowhere to hide, does he also stretch that out to anyone in a position of power, no matter who they are, not being allowed to get away with this and nobody turning a blind eye to anybody using sex as a weapon?
Of course. Of course. I want equality before the law. No one, from the most exalted figure in this land to the lowest, should be free from scrutiny, accountability, and ultimately the full force of the law. Above all, the reason to do this is it will give the government of the day incontrovertible evidence and rationale to make the changes that are necessary. And that will include within our immigration system, because the immigration system should at its heart have one abiding objective. Above all the others, economic and social, it should be one that puts the safety of the British people first. If the data shows men from certain countries are disproportionately likely to commit sexual crimes against young girls here in our country, then any responsible government would suspend visas immediately and would design a different system that protects women and girls in this country. As we've heard throughout this debate, right now there is an unwillingness across councils, the police, and prosecutions to report and act upon the truth. The facts about crime are covered up because of a toxic combination of bureaucratic inertia and weak leaders who pussyfoot around the truth. They refuse to acknowledge any evidence that contradicts their illusion of Britain as a harmonious, well-integrated country, or that confounds their glib statements that diversity is our strength. It is not always the case, as we've seen. In 2012, an audit by the Children's Commissioner on grooming found that ethnicity was recorded in 79% of cases. By 2025, Baroness Casey found that ethnicity data was only being recorded in a third of cases. And more broadly, Ministry of Justice data shows that the police and courts are collecting less data on the ethnicity of criminals, including those who commit child sex abuse, than at any time in the past 15 years. Wow. So the problem is getting worse, much worse. The former Home Secretary ordered officials to publish the nationalities of foreign offenders awaiting deportation. This is obviously welcome, but let's be clear, this is a tiny proportion of the issue, and even that we are still awaiting. The only solution to guarantee transparency is to make public authorities duty-bound by the law of the land to report the truth. So, of course, we should all support this petition. I want to go further. Firstly, we must release the court transcripts unredacted. And we must change the entire climate in our criminal justice system where court transcripts of any case are easily available to everyone, from journalists to members of parliament to campaigners. The current system is unsustainable and completely absurd in an age of AI, where these transcripts could be made available in an affordable way. Secondly, we need to release every email, every memo, every record held by central government, local councils, and police forces relating to grooming gangs. And we should do it as soon as possible. How ridiculous when you think about it, that everything that's being released today, the WhatsApp messages, the text messages, and so on, admittedly about serious errors of judgment and related to appalling crimes in and of themselves, with the paedophile friend Peter Mandelson, is attracting this extraordinary furore in the House of Commons chamber, in the media, and yet these documents relating to thousands and thousands of girls in each and every one of our constituencies are being withheld. Let's get them into the public domain and use transparency as the way to drive change. Thirdly, increase the funding of the National Crime Agency to go after the perpetrators and the public officials who were obviously complicit. Fourthly, lock up the perpetrators with mandatory whole-life sentences. The current sentences being handed down to some of these perpetrators are insults to the victims. This isn't a new thing. It's not the fault of this government. It's a long-standing failure of our criminal justice system. I started perhaps too late to pay an interest in this a year or so ago and was stunned at the pathetic short sentences being handed down by judges. Let me give you one example that I came across. In Bradford Crown Court, a judge handed out a 6.5-year sentence. That was to a man who drugged a 13-year-old girl and then raped her at least twice, and with other men queued up to rape her. The young girl obviously lives with these scars today. In fact, she later became addicted to drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism. 6.5 years for that. Imagine if that was your daughter, or anyone, frankly, in this country, and he'd probably been out on license in 4 years, if it hadn't been, myself and others, referred to the Attorney General and then ultimately to the Court of Appeal as an unduly lenient sentence and increased. Let's change the law and make these individuals, these vile perpetrators, serve the rest of their lives in prison. That's the least that the victims deserve. And lastly, strip citizenship from dual citizens and deport them. Deport them far away from these shores. And if countries will not take them back, as some do not wish to do so, then why on earth are our constituents paying millions of pounds in foreign aid to those countries? Why on earth is the Home Office issuing thousands of visas to them so their own citizens can come here for business, for students, for pleasure? No. Use every lever of the British state to get these vile individuals out of our country and to protect our women and girls. Now, none of those things will be enough for the victims whose childhoods were stolen from them, for whom the scarring will never fade. What possibly could? But it will move us a step closer to correcting this injustice and, above all, to preventing future ones.
We now move to front bench contributions, and on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, I call Tessa Munt.
Thank you, Mr Vickers, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I've listened carefully to this debate, and I have to say that I would say that child sexual abuse is one of the most despicable crimes, but we absolutely need to pay attention to the victims. And I want to pay tribute to those of you sitting here today who are victims, and I would thank you for attending. And I understand that what you have heard today may well have triggered you to re-experience the things that you've suffered as children, and some of you perhaps as adults. And we as Liberal Democrats will support any measure that actually goes some way to deliver some justice for the victims and to try and help to prevent these sorts of horrific acts from occurring again in the future. I was one of the 7 MPs, cross-party, who approached Theresa May after I was elected in 2010 and spent some time trying to persuade her of the merits of having the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. And it took a long time to persuade her, and then it took further time to persuade her not to use the chairs that she had chosen because they were part of the infrastructure or might be perceived as part of the infrastructure of the very problem that we were trying to face. And that there was institutional abuse across many of our accepted centres of power. And I just want to accentuate the fact that child sexual abuse is all about the abuse of power, the misuse of power, and that relationships are absolutely catastrophic when someone removes the power from an individual. And there are numbers of ways of doing this, and I'm going to move straight to ask the Minister, if I may, if she would consider using some of the academic research that's been done. And certainly I know that Amnesty International has lent quite hard on something called Biderman's framework of coercion. And that was, Biderman spoke about this in 1957, Amnesty International released this in 1975. And what it does is it talks about power, the use and abuse of power, of coercive control in particular, and talks about isolation of victims and the monopolisation of perspectives and the induced debility and exhaustion that victims suffer, the threats that they're subject to, the occasional indulgences, those treats that make them feel that they might be special. That business of the abusers, the perpetrators, demonstrating omnipotence, the degradation of victims, and very often the enforcement of trivial demands just to absolutely force the power into the place by the perpetrator against the victim. And the perpetrators are always responsible. There is no one under the age of 16, and many over the age of 16, who can consent to rape. Rape is in itself a word that suggests there should be no consent, but no one under the age of 16 can consent to that. So I would just, my party and I agree absolutely with the idea that we should collect the data and share the data where it's appropriate on nationality and ethnicity. But I would just draw attention to the fact that that has started to happen, and I've certainly got some information in front of me that reflects that that data is being collected. Whether it's being shared or not, I don't know, but we certainly, I think, need to make sure that the CPS, judges, magistrates, teachers and lecturers, schools generally, health staff, council staff, particularly those in adult social care and children's social care, and housing officers, as well as the police, are the people who are absolutely required to collect data and to share it. There should be compulsory training, I believe, for all of those involved in those tasks that I've just listed. And that coercive control should not be viewed as something that only applies in the situation of domestic abuse, because it is coercive control where victims need to be heard, and we need to recognise, and people need to be trained to recognise the signs of coercion. I certainly will.
I'm grateful
Pinkerton.
Friend for giving way. A few moments ago she mentioned data, and the House of Commons Library have compiled some information that I've seen from 2021 to 2025 that shows that the single largest ethnic perpetrator of child sexual abuse in the United Kingdom were white British men, at 58.35% of all instances. And I don't say that in order to reinforce points already made. I raise that point to emphasise the second most prominent category, which is simply unknown. And that data shadow is shameful. It fails the victims of child sexual exploitations, but it also creates the space in which speculation and distrust has been allowed to flourish. So does my honourable friend agree with me that we don't just need to gather better data, we need to robustly and systematically analyse it, and to finally allow the truth of child sexual exploitation to be brought out into the light?
Absolutely. I think somebody earlier on said that sunlight was the best disinfectant, and I would absolutely, I have the figures here. So ethnicity figures for those who have had proceedings against them. As I understand it, there's 989. In the last 5 years, there have been 989 people who are of Asian background, which is 8% of offenders. Sorry, those who had proceedings. And that 989 compares with 12,157 who had proceedings against them, who were of white British origin. And if I may, I'll just quote, the white British who were sentenced numbered 8,730, and it was 622 for those who were sentenced who were of Asian origin. I am not in any way decrying what has happened to those people, anyone who has been abused in this situation. But I speak from personal experience because I declared quite openly in the last Parliament that I was a victim of child sex abuse. It happened to be between when I was 12 and when I was 17. And I'm very lucky because I had an enormous amount of support, both from counsellors and from my family. I'm not over it.
You give way.
In a minute. I'm not over it, but there are ways that you can survive and you can thrive. And I came here in 2010 with that in the back of my head, and I wanted to make sure that that was something that came to the fore in that Parliament, and it did. And I am not finished, which is why I'm back here now. Thank you. So, oh, yes.
Lee Anderson.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's come out with quite a few bits of interesting data today. I wonder if she's got any data on how many white British working class girls have been systematically raped.
I haven't, but I was looking particularly at the ethnicity, which is
Well,
what... No, forgive me. I was referring to, I think it was the member for Great Yarmouth who actually had the petition, and it was my honourable friend who actually presented this earlier on today on his behalf. I think it's a very good thing that he's done this, because I think anything that brings information into the public domain is a good thing. And I salute him for doing that, because it's something that I feel terribly strongly about, as probably people will have seen in previous contributions I made in Parliament. Yes.
Sullivan.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and to thank her for her bravery and to be an example for survivors. And I think I just want to pay tribute and thank her and all those that have experienced this, that there is hope, and to reach out and to have faith. But we need to make sure that the authorities listen to those voices seriously. But I just want to pay tribute and thank her.
I thank you. Listen, this is absolutely not about me, Chair. Absolutely not about me. All I would say is I'm an example of how you can come through and do something. But my God, I've been frustrated watching that independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which eventually turned into Baroness Jay's recommendations, about which absolutely nothing was done for some time. We need to proceed and make sure all of those 22 recommendations, Baroness Casey's recommendations, are implemented. I'm aware that the government is doing stuff. It is never fast enough. Never fast enough, but it just needs to happen. And the most important thing, I feel very strongly that if we don't, we need to train all of those people I mentioned before, the judges, the teachers, everybody, the police, crikey, the police. We need to train them so they understand what coercive control is. And they also need to recognise what it is that can be done to challenge what is colloquially referred to as the manosphere. Because I met a young woman 2-3 weeks ago, and two of her friends, who were complaining about the fact that boys in her school, and she was young, boys in her school had said to her that she couldn't tell him what to do because she was a girl. This has to stop. It has to stop, because this just feeds this whole thing. Women have been downtrodden for many, many years. Now we're brave enough to speak out. Now we have to make sure that those who are in authority have the ability to tell us because they understand, not ask us because we do. So And I want to just make absolutely certain that we do have that compulsory training in place. We need to challenge that toxic masculinity. As I said, I recognise that it's triggering to everybody when this stuff comes up. And I hope above all hopes that you are able to sleep with a little more peace tonight. Yes.
It's the public gallery, but
I'm sorry.
go through the chair.
I'm sorry. That the members of the public who have suffered, I hope they are able to sleep a little more peacefully. But if we can have data collection, data sharing, it's really, we just need to bring some rigour and some force into what's doing. Lots of people have looked at this over a period of years. Have I time to raise one more small point? Thank you. I'd just like to bring in the subject of religion. And I'm particularly interested in religion because I think belief systems, faith systems, whatever, there's no mechanism, as far as I can tell, for collecting this data. And you only have to look at the census in, I think it was 2011, where certainly in my neck of the woods, we had masses of people who referred to themselves as Jedi. What people choose to call themselves in religious terms is absolutely up to interpretation. And I'm not entirely sure that we can, there's a way of actually controlling that, making that data clean. Experience would tell me that actually, if you mention and bring religion into this, historically, we would be looking, in the near past, we would have been looking at the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church, and some of the most appalling things that happened to people, and the fact that that power that was vested in people who had positions within the church, as they do within youth movements and other places. I don't know whether it's possible to hold religious data and whether there's a real purpose, and I'm not sure that we can actually get anywhere with that, but I recognise that the nationality and ethnicity data is useful and helpful. Immigration status, I know that the Home Secretary has the power to remove people, so that data may look a bit squiff if people are being deported, as they are, and I know that there are several different ways in which the Home Secretary can remove people on different situations. So we may find that those figures are going down. They may not be useful. They may not show the whole picture when we actually look at those, but I welcome the Minister's comments on that. So, as I said, the Liberal Democrats will support anything that improves the situation for victims. We have to remember the victims in all of this, and we have to protect children into the future. And as I said, I hope that victims can sleep a little better every time that they hear a debate like this, and something will happen. Thank you.
It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I begin by thanking all members who contributed to today's debate, the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth for bringing forward this important petition, and the more than 260,000 people who signed the petition. I pay tribute to those victims who've lived through some of the most horrific issues and incidents and are bravely doing so much to support others and prevent this happening to others. The scale of support for this petition demonstrates the strength of feeling that exists across the country on this issue. Child sexual exploitation and abuse are amongst the most horrific crimes that can be committed. The offenders are the most vile, sick, evil individuals amongst us. Their actions leave lasting scars on victims and destroy young lives. Our first duty as legislators and as a society is to do everything possible to prevent these crimes and bring perpetrators to justice. For many people who signed this petition, this debate is inseparable from the grooming gang scandal that has scarred towns and communities the length of this country. What happened was not only the despicable actions of offenders, but it was also the failure of institutions. Vulnerable children were abused, while too many warning signs were missed, too many concerns were ignored, and too many difficult questions were unasked. That failure remains one of the darkest chapters in this country's history. The crimes themselves were horrific. What makes this even more shocking is that in too many cases, victims were failed by the very institutions that existed to protect them. If we're serious about ensuring that such failures are never repeated, we must be willing to gather the evidence, confront the facts and learn the lessons, however uncomfortable they may be for some. At its heart, this petition asks whether we're collecting enough information about those who commit these crimes to properly understand who they are and to stop them. The truth is that we need to know who is committing these crimes. The more accurate information we have, the better informed this House, this government, the police and safeguarding agencies will be when deciding how to prevent them. I will.
Sarah Champion.
I wonder if my honourable friend shares my frustration that the petition didn't include the victims and survivors, because I know from my experience, the vast majority are white British girls, but there are also a particular sect of Sikh girls that are being very aggressively targeted, and it would be really good to have that so the police could do more protection work.
I think you're entirely right. I think so many people have raised the fact that sunshine is a major disinfectant. Actually, we need to be more transparent. We need to know who the victims are. We need to know who the perpetrators are so that we can seek those solutions, give those victims the support that they require. As Baroness Casey's recent audit highlighted, there have been significant shortcomings in the collection of data relating to perpetrators of group-based child sexual exploitation. I welcome the fact that the government has now accepted her recommendation that ethnicity and nationality data should be collected more consistently. However, accepting the principle is only the beginning. The real question is whether, how and when that commitment will be delivered in practice. This is not a new issue. During the passage of the Crime and Policing Bill, I and colleagues tabled amendments that would have required greater transparency around the collection and publication of ethnicity data relating to sexual offenders and grooming gangs. The purpose was simple: to ensure that collection of this information did not depend on changing priorities or varying practices between police forces. Those proposals were resisted by this government. I therefore welcome the government's change of position, but wish it had come sooner. We need to confront these failings now and not wait for another report, another scandal or another public outcry. For too long, a lack of proper data has meant legitimate concerns were dismissed and public confidence undermined. One of the striking features of this debate is that independent researchers have often been able to identify trends and patterns that official systems have struggled to capture. It cannot be right that academics are sometimes able to build a clearer picture of offending patterns than the institutions responsible for recording and responding to these crimes. The state should know what is happening within its own criminal justice system. This debate is not about stigmatising communities. It's about protecting victims and confronting facts wherever the evidence leads. Baroness Casey's audit contained one particularly troubling example. She described finding a children's case file in which the word Pakistani had literally been Tipexed out. Whatever the reason, that is not how safeguarding should operate. We cannot protect children if information is ignored, obscured or left unrecorded. As Becky Riggs, the National Policing Lead for Child Protection Investigations, has acknowledged, this data helps policing understand risks, vulnerabilities and where resources should be targeted. That is why improving the quality and completeness of this data matters so much. The government has accepted the principle. The question now is how quickly, how comprehensively and how consistently it will be delivered across every police force in the country. The public needs to be confident that the authorities are prepared to ask difficult questions, collect evidence rigorously and publish findings honestly. I welcome the Minister to her place and would be grateful if the Minister could address 3 specific points. First, what discussions has the government had with chief constables and police leaders about improving the collection of ethnicity, nationality and other relevant data relating to group-based child sexual exploitation? Secondly, how will progress be measured? What expectations will be placed upon forces and how will compliance be monitored? Thirdly, when will Parliament next receive an update on progress so that we can assess whether the commitments made following Baroness Casey's review are actually being delivered? better data alone will not solve this problem. We also need effective policing, strong safeguarding, successful prosecutions and proper support for victims and survivors. But better data is an essential part of the solution. The lesson from every review, every inquiry and every survivor's testimony is the same. Difficult facts do not disappear because institutions choose not to record them. The failures of previous generations of authorities to tackle child sexual exploitation are a stain on this country's record. We owe it to survivors to do better. That means putting safeguarding before institutional reputation, evidence before ideology, and being prepared to follow the facts wherever they lead. The victims of these appalling crimes deserve justice. They deserve truth, and they deserve confidence that every possible lesson has been learned. For that reason, I welcome this debate. I thank the petitioners for bringing this issue before Parliament, and I hope the Government will now ensure that commitments it has made on transparency and data collection are fully and consistently delivered. Let's deliver justice for victims, hold perpetrators to account, and do everything we can to prevent these crimes ever happening again.
Thank you, Chair. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak on this most important issue today, Chair. And I am grateful to all of the members who have contributed with such passion and sensitivity and care for the victims that are with us today, those brave women and those who aren't. At the heart of this debate has absolutely been the theme that when women and girls come forward, we must absolutely believe them. I thank you for that. I want to thank the Honourable Member for Caithness, Sunderland and Easter Ross, who provided a clear and balanced account of the petition's main arguments. I also want to thank the petitioners for the role they have played in bringing us together today, including the 598 signatories from Bolsover who have allowed us to have this cross-party debate with so much consensus. So this is my first opportunity to respond to a debate as Minister for Safeguarding, and it is absolutely one of the most important issues that we face as a Parliament. I pay tribute to my predecessor, the Honourable Member for Birmingham Yardley, for her tireless work in supporting victims of these heinous crimes. The grooming gang scandal is one of the darkest moments of our nation's history. Every time I meet one of the survivors, I hear the same story. Not only were these girls abused by these predators, they were ignored, belittled, and even blamed. Too many endured years of being told that the crimes against them didn't matter and therefore they didn't matter either. And now, as women seeking truth and justice, there are still those who seek to exploit them with lies and misinformation spread daily by people claiming to represent the best interests of these victims. We keep seeing too many not interested in victims, interested in themselves. Their lies do nothing but to undermine the hard work happening to uncover the answers that survivors have long searched for. I am so proud to be the minister in the government which is absolutely fighting to get and deliver those answers. Now, my policy responsibilities are broad, but they are connected by a single sacred thread: the state's responsibility to keep the most vulnerable in our society safe. Now, there has been a lot of talk about data and evidence today, and I'll come to this shortly. But first, a word for the victims and survivors of all the different types of abuse that we've been talking about today. The testimony that we have heard has been absolutely horrendous. And I thank every member that has bought it, and I thank every victim and survivor that has shared it. We will never forget the terrible suffering that you have endured. And that's why I will be part of a team and a government that will strive relentlessly to prevent others going through what you have. That will be my focus every single day in this role as we drive forward the government's mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade. To meet that goal, we must tackle all forms of child sexual abuse and exploitation while taking every possible step to protect children from harm. So turning to the crux of this debate and the specific points that have been raised. It's been mentioned often, but as members are aware, in February 25, the Prime Minister and the then Home Secretary commissioned Baroness Louise Casey of Blackstone to evaluate the scale, nature and drivers of group-based sexual exploitation and abuse. The government immediately accepted the 12 recommendations from Baroness Casey's audit. This included making it a requirement for police to collect the ethnicity and nationality data of individuals suspected of being members of grooming gangs or perpetrators of other group-based sexual exploitation. Let me... I will.
Champion.
Will the government also accept the 20 recommendations by the ICSA inquiry?
Minister.
Thank you for your intervention, and I will be coming to that absolutely as part of this speech. So let me assert once more the government's unwavering commitment to delivering all of the recommendations set out in Baroness Casey's national audit, which exposed over a decade of institutional failure. This was, without question, one of the darkest episodes in our country's history, and every state, every part of the state, bears a responsibility to ensure this is never repeated. So Baroness Casey was rightly clear that the collection of suspect ethnicity data in grooming gangs cases is poor. We agree and we are acting. That is why, in July last year, the then Home Secretary wrote to all Chief Constables, setting out the expectation that ethnicity data should be collected from all suspects in child sexual exploitation cases, and to urge them to make sure that they are fulfilling this obligation. We continue to work with policing colleagues to improve data collection and analysis. But incredibly importantly, we are legislating to give the Home Secretary the power to mandate the collection of ethnicity data by police officers. The Police Reform White Paper, published in January, set out our intention to put data standards for policing, including in this area, rightly on a statutory footing. So I say clearly to all those who signed the E-petition, the government will legislate to ensure that we fix this issue. Baroness Casey was clear. Given evidence available in some local areas, we need better ethnicity and nationality data at a national level to strengthen understanding and accountability. We will follow that evidence without fear or favour, and we will not let cultural sensitivities stand in our way. The Home Secretary said it best last December. We must root out this evil once and for all. The sickening acts of a minority of evil men, as well as those in positions of authority who looked the other way, must not be allowed to marginalise or demonise entire communities of law-abiding citizens. So coming on to the inquiry into grooming gangs, members will be aware that the government set up the independent inquiry into grooming gangs earlier this year. I am proud to be part of a government that is delivering on this incredibly important work to uncover the truth. The inquiry has now begun its crucial work to give survivors of these horrific crimes long-awaited answers. It will have laser focus on grooming gangs, including the role that ethnicity, religion and culture played in these terrible crimes. It has a budget of £65 million and the Chair has confirmed the funding is sufficient to deliver the inquiry. The inquiry has been designed to be time-limited for 3 years. That's long enough to go deep into where it matters the most, with a definitive end date, could get the answers victims and survivors need. Separately, the government is also making sure that everything we do is underpinned by evidence, and I do welcome you sending me any additional research and information you have in this area. The member for the lovely place that I'm not quite sure of in it was the Liberal Democrat spokesperson. If you could send me that would be fantastic too. Thank you. So we will be looking at research, including around the role ethnicity, culture and religion played in group-based offending, so that our response can lead to lasting, systemic change that everybody in this House, including the member for Great Yarmouth, is absolutely right to be calling for today. Yes, sorry.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I think there is a worrying tendency to view these issues as historical, and a few months ago I pressed the Home Secretary on the question of whether the National Inquiry will be able to look at evidence of current crimes which may be being committed and refer them to the relevant agencies. Does she agree with me that that's absolutely necessary if we're going to deal with these crimes today?
Yeah. Thank you for that intervention. It absolutely is, and I will be coming to that as part of this speech. Okay. Yes, I'll give way.
Thank the Minister very much for giving way. I can't remember whether I actually mentioned this, and my notes have gone, but I didn't follow them anyway. I just wanted to draw her attention to, particularly to small religious groups, which is the terminology I would use to describe what most of us would probably call cults, and that we should really make sure that that is a focus of some attention within that review, within that inquiry, because there are any number of, particularly children, but of both genders, but also very vulnerable adults who are forced into situations over which they have very little control. It's that power dynamic. Thank you.
Thank you. I give way as well.
Ayub Khan. Giving way. I welcome the £65 million additional support in getting to the facts of what happened up and down this country. But in terms of youth centres, which were mentioned by an honourable member, in Birmingham we've lost 38 youth centres. Will the Minister consider looking at further investment for youth centres, which can capture a lot of data, which may be useful?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank the member for the intervention. And I think that we all have seen the impact of 14 years of cuts to services, and there are lots of ways that things need improving. I can't speak specifically on that point. On the member's point before, yes, the inquiry will look at will look at any current offending. So, as raised by the honourable member for Keighley and Ilkley, from the moment the inquiry was announced in June 2025, organisations already had legal obligations to protect relevant information. A letter from the government was not required to make this case. I will.
Be more. Thank the Minister for giving way on that point. But if that was the case, why did Baroness Casey feel it was strong enough on this issue to include it as a part of a recommendation of the report?
Minister.
Thank you. So continuing on from that, thank you for that intervention. It also made sense to wait until a draft term of reference setting out the scope of the inquiry was developed and published in December 25. At that point, the chair of the inquiry wrote to the Cabinet Secretary, and the Home Office wrote to the National Police Chiefs Council and Home Office sponsored arm's-length bodies in January 26 to emphasise the importance of retaining documents. The honourable member also raised the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. The government has set out a clear plan how we will deliver against the ICSA recommendations, and this includes reforms to the disclosure and barring service, a new mandatory reporting duty, a removal of the limitation period for child sexual abuse civil claims, establishing a new child protection authority, rolling out the Child House model across England to improve support for victims and survivors with £50 million additional funding, Where we've been able to move quickly, we have. However, many of the recommendations require systematic and legislative change. We're moving as quickly as due process allows and have recently introduced a tranche of measures in the Crime and Policing Act. Where we're not currently taking forward recommendations, we've been clear about the reasons for this. The Honourable Member also made the case for the inclusion of Bradford and Keighley in the independent inquiry. It's not for me to decide that, as set out at length to him by the Chair of the inquiry on the 19th of May at the Home Affairs Select Committee. The inquiry will shortly set out their plans. I'm sorry, I have lots of interventions. I would just finish with this regarding the funding of the inquiry. The Chair has been clear that they're determined to deliver on time and budget, and that the inquiry believes this is achievable.
Yes. Robbie Moore.
Could the Minister just answer two questions? If the Government was confident enough to announce Oldham over 18 months ago, why is the Government not confident enough to announce Bradford and Keighley will be part of the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry? And on the cost of the 65 million, is the Government challenging the independent chair, Baroness Longfield, of the inquiry when she stated in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee last week to me that she felt 65 million was about right, when she has not yet announced what local areas the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry will be looking at, or indeed how many local areas the National Grooming Gangs will be looking at?
Thank you. I thank you for those interventions. I think that it is absolutely right. This is an independent inquiry, and it is not for me to decide where these will be. You'll find out shortly whether your area will be included. So before wrapping up, I'll make some further general points. The first is to reiterate that we are working closely with police forces to strengthen how suspect ethnicity data is collected, identifying gaps and driving improvements so our evidence base is clearer, more consistent and better supports action. We are strengthening how safeguarding agencies and key institutions work together to identify, disrupt and prosecute group-based child sexual exploitation. This includes bringing together police, local authorities, children's services, schools and health partners to share intelligence, spot patterns and act faster. And we're reinforcing our expectation that all agencies play their full part, so the National Police response to the statutory inquiry are drawing on the fullest possible evidence and supported by a coordinated, intelligence-led system that leaves no gaps for offenders to exploit. So regarding the questions raised by the Honourable Member for Stockton West, we have committed to legislate through the Police Reform Bill. Training and tracking and enforcement will be set out as part of that process. On rape gang inquiries, I want to pay, again, tribute to victims and survivors who have shared their experiences. I recognise how difficult and how personal this is. Their courage in speaking out is absolutely extraordinary, and these issues cannot and will not be ignored. The independent inquiry into grooming gangs is an official statutory established under the Inquiries Act. It has a clear mandate to uncover... I just want to make some progress because I've given away so many times. It has a clear mandate to uncover the truth and deliver justice for victims and survivors. I want to be clear that if the rape gang inquiry encounters any evidence of criminal conduct as part of their work, it should be passed on to law enforcement. And I welcome the Honourable Member's previous commitment to work constructively with the statutory inquiry. So I thank again the petitioners and all members who have taken part in today's debate. There is no doubt that this is an important subject. It is right that we expose the full scrutiny of Parliament. Like my predecessor, I am not one who will shy away from having tough conversations. We have had those today, and no doubt we will be having more. I welcome them all. I have always been guided by an unshakable belief that the protection of the most vulnerable in our society, especially children, is one of the state's most vital responsibilities. Where that duty has not been upheld, the consequences are devastating, and this government is taking action to ensure the failings of the past are never repeated. I'll give way to the member on that.
I've spoke to several rape gang victims, and many of them tell me they are fed up to hearing politicians, saying that they are brave. They want bravery from politicians. They want real action. So does the Minister agree with me that any British national that's convicted of a sex offence against children should be locked up for life, and any foreign offender should be deported?
Thank you to the member for the intervention. This is something we can absolutely agree on. Where there is an offence committed, then the perpetrator should face the full force of the law. On terms of victims not wanting to be called brave and politicians being called brave when they speak out, which I'm sure that the other honourable member has heard, no victim wants to be called brave. Instead, what we want is justice and to see a government and parliament that acts. And that is what we are getting to today. So finally, there has been much talk about transparency. Let me state again firmly that we recognise the need to expose the worst examples of human behaviour to the sharp glare of scrutiny. In our mission to protect children and vulnerable people from harm, we will never shy away from the truth regardless of what is found. We will work to ensure that perpetrators are brought to justice and that victims and survivors receive the support they absolutely deserve, so that no child is overlooked, no warning signs are ignored, that every child is better protected in every community in the future. Because ultimately, this is about trust. Trust that the system will act, that the victims will be heard, and that these injustices will never be allowed to happen again. Thank you.
Well, Jamie Stone to wind up.
Thank you very much indeed. The hour grows late, and the people, I mustn't mention the public gallery, have sat patiently and have listened. We know just how many people signed this petition. That, therefore, is an indication of how important it was out there. We also know that we have members from all over the UK here, from Wales, from Scotland, two of my colleagues, from all parts of England, and from Northern Ireland. And this is because the issue matters in the body politic. And finally this, we should all remind ourselves that these debates, the petition debates, have probably some of the highest viewing figures of anything that happens in this place. It's up there with PMQs. So an awful lot of people out there will be watching at this precise moment. And the key is, Mr. Vickers, that we've had a full and proper discussion. We've aired the issue, but it all depends what happens next. I rest my case with that.
Is that this House has considered E-petition 730605 relating to the collection and publication of child sexual offender data. Does many of that opinion say aye? Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.